That chairman, with this bill as it sits now, which I admit is not as bad as it used to be, can threaten all of you with a firehouse primary if you don't do what he likes or she likes. And on our side, our chairman or chairwoman, whoever it might be, can do exactly the same thing to us. I don't like the way you voted on something, so I'm giving you all conventions. I tell you, that's way too much power, way too much mischief that can happen in our electoral lives. Not just the Senate, but the House, all of us, all 140. This bill was bad from the start. It's a little better now, but it's still really bad. Folks, think about what we might do with this bill. Two people will have that much influence over every single seat in this chamber. I really hope that we will seriously consider just telling this bill goodbye. There are things we can do. I was talking to the senator from Prince William. There are things we can do to tweak this up to make our existing law better, to address the issues that the junior senator from Richmond went through and the senator from Northern Chesapeake went through. We can do those. But this bill sure isn't the answer. Please, folks, let's put this bill to rest.
Thank the senator. For what purpose, Senator from Roanoke County, Senator Suderline rise?
Mr. President, to speak against the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, this bill is problematic. It will not just put the power in the one person's hand in each party, but it would put the power in the hands of the state central committees of each party, which is not that comforting of a thought. A few weeks ago, several members of this body eulogized Mr. Thomas, and in the eulogy they talked about back when he was party chair, and then when he was removed from party chair rather abruptly. I would suggest that if the Democratic Party of Virginia had this law on the books at that time, there would have been a very interesting slate of party methods of nomination going through all 140 seats throughout the 70s. I think that if this were into effect a few years ago in the Republican Party, we also would have had party-run methods everywhere. And I'm someone that's been nominated by both party-run method and primary. But you know what was great? Each time that decision was made by the people in my district. And I might not have always wanted it to be the exact way they did it, but it was made by actual members of the party in my area. What this bill does before you is this allows a majority of the state central committee, so it doesn't matter what people in your region of the Commonwealth think is the best method to nominate you. We're going to let people elsewhere. Our state central committee is not as big, and there are several of us that likely do not have any member of the state central committee living in our district. So there's no one in the entire district that even gets to vote on what the method of nomination will be. I very well see this being something that you'll have the parties come, and we think that they're not going to be willing to put everyone through the process because they have 2 or 3 that they're targeting. I'm confident that they would be willing to run the 140 through there, and I think this bill is a very dangerous bill. I don't think that it's properly before us, but more importantly than that, we need to reject this bill today and not send us down this path. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. For what purpose does the senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Sarvell, rise?
Speaking to the bill.
The floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, first of all, I appreciate the comments from the senior senator from Chesapeake, but I don't think he's reading the statute right. The bill, first of all, says the decision rests with the party, and Section 24.2100 defines the party as an organization of citizens which is governed by a state central committee, and so it doesn't rest the decision with the chairman of the party. It rests it with the state central committee, and it would be my expectation that the state central committee would adopt some sort of policy about this one way or the other. And I don't think it rests one person. But having said that, beyond that, I trust the state central committee more than I trust what's going on at the local level. I think there's a lot more opportunity for mischief locally if there's some local chairman who doesn't like a member and wants to appoint a legislative district chairman who is hostile to a member to choose a convention method, which is what, or a primary for that matter, whichever would be different. But I think it's much more likely a local chairman or local legislative district committee would be likely to choose a method which is a poison pill or hostile or whatever. And so from my perspective, this minimizes the risk that we will have mischief played in our process. And in general, I think these decisions are best made by lots of people, and primaries encourage participation. And the policy of the Commonwealth ought to be that we should have primaries, which I think this is what will flow if this passes. So I hope we will support the bill.
What purpose is Senator from Russell, Senator Chafin rise?
Mr. Chairman, some of the members may know, others not, but for the past almost 30 years or so, I have enjoyed going out west, primarily to Montana, to hunt elk with a bow and arrow. And Mr. President, when you're hunting that type of magnificent animal, it's absolutely imperative that you know which way the wind's blowing. Okay, so you take these little bottles, a little squeeze bottle, and you put baby powder in it, and periodically as you walk along and as you go up the incline or down the incline, depending upon the time of day, you want to test the wind, and you squeeze that baby powder out, and it travels in a certain direction, and you do that 2 or 3 times, and you can be reassured that the elk will not scent you, because you have to get really close with bow and arrow. Now, Mr. President, we all like to think that we know which way the wind's blowing politically too. And only a fool disregards the wind and the way that the wind blows. But I can tell you, Mr. President, I've been around a few years, a few more people have been around a few more years, but the wind doesn't blow the same way all the time, Mr. President. The wind doesn't come out of the same direction every day. The wind will change. Seasons will change. Climate will change. Everything will change that we hold true and value. And we should be sure that that change is the one constant. That is the one constant that we enjoy in this world. And so, Mr. President, it is particularly dangerous for us to think that the winds will always prevail in a way that a lot of us would like to think that a primary is better for us. It is particularly dangerous for us to count on that, because I have seen times in the very recent past when that would not have been the occasion. That would not have been the very situation that we were dealing with. And so I don't have my little squeeze bottle to see which way the wind's blowing right now on this bill, Mr. President, but I hope the wind blows this bill out of this building, okay? because this bill could cause every member, every single one of us, a lot of heartache and a lot of work, Mr. President. Thank you.
Senator. For what purpose is a junior senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the bill, the substitute, it's been an interesting debate, and I'd like to just comment on a couple of the comments that we've heard yesterday and again today. The gentleman, the senator from Russell, made a very good point, and in the back of my mind, I am not going to forget what Senator Obenshain said yesterday, and in 4 years, I hope I don't rue the day and recall him saying, be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. I'll say the following. The only thing I disagreed with Senator Chafin about, Mr. President, is whether primary is better or convention is better. I always think when more people come into the process, it's better for the election. The more people that can participate in the election process, the better. And we all, it's a fact that the more people that will participate in a primary than they will in a convention. I wish that we could have a bill that would say it's a default to primary, period, full stop. We don't have that right now. This gets us the closest to it. But let me remind the body what happened in 2013. First of all, Senator Servell is right when he said it's not one individual, it's the State Central Committee. But in 2013, I remember the State Central Committee for the Republican Party changed, got different people on there, and they orchestrated a process where there was a convention and not a primary. And there's little doubt in a lot of folks' mind that had there been a primary and Bowling had got the nomination, Governor McAuliffe might not have been the governor. So I am not at all convinced that machinations can't come to fruition and the state central body will manipulate it. But this bill is better than what it was, and what I'm going to do off session, is to determine whether or not it will pass constitutional muster to have a default to primary. I know that Senator Servell said yesterday that his understanding was that it was unconstitutional. I'm not so sure. I'm going to vote for this measure now, but I promise you, Mr. President, I will look into it and I will come back, and if I can author a bill next year that will have a default to a primary, I'll do that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is the Senator from Lynchburg, Senator Peake, rise?
Yes, sir, Mr. President, to see if the senator from Fairfax, Servell, would rise for a question.
Will Senator yield for a question?
I'll yield.
Senator yields.
Yes, the question, what issues are you referring to? What problems did we have last year or the year before that this bill is trying to fix?
Senator's floor.
Mr. President, I believe one of the issues was a certain delegate from Central Virginia whose papers got all mixed up and didn't get filed, and then he had to run as a write-in candidate. Might be one of the issues that this was probably trying to fix. But I know the chairman of P&E, I think, has some ideas too. I'll yield to him.
There were at least two races, and I would say to the gentleman, Mr. President, that there were at least two races in Virginia last year where there were problems in the communication of the nomination. And one of those problems was eventually resolved in the candidate's favor, the candidate of choice's favor, and both of these problems occurred on your side of the aisle. But one of the problems was resolved in the candidate's favor at the State Board of Elections. The other problem resulted in a write-in campaign. The purpose of the underlying bill is to make sure there is a designated source of information for the state Department of Elections, and that is the state party in the bill.
Thank you. Now, speaking to the bill, Mr. President.
Senator's the floor.
And that's what I thought, and I wanted to be clear. So, in the past 4, 6, 8, 10 years, 140 people running, sometimes just 100 for the House. Two people that I can recall in the past decade, there may have been several more, have not been able to get their paperwork in to the State Board of Elections properly. And one of the delegates who had to run as a write-in, they said there was an email which was never provided and did not even file his certificate of candidacy. That was nothing to do with the State Board of Elections or anything. That was personal candidate responsibility. The other delegate, there was an indication of an email to the wrong person, had filed his proper paperwork on his own. We do not need to change the entire system of picking our candidates and certifying them to the State Board of Elections because of two candidates made errors. And this bill, for us to take away from the party their methods and to dictate to the parties what they are going to do, and to put in the hand. It's hard enough when you have a legislative district chair. All right, I see something. We may be in good shape. I will wrap it up then. Thank you, Senator McPeake over there. It's a bad bill. Oh, McPike, excuse me. And I would ask that you vote against this bill.
That's right. That's right. The question is, shall House Bill 1116 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 14, noes 26.
Ayes 14, noes 26. House Bill 1116 fails.
House Bill.
Senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Yes, sir. Mr. President, having voted on the prevailing side of House Bill 528, I move that the vote by which that bill passed be reconsidered.
I think, yes, 528 on page 59.
Yes, sir.
Question is, shall the vote by which House Bill 528 passed be reconsidered? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 39, noes 0.
Ayes 39, no 0. The motion is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that House Bill 528 go by for the day.
Without objection? There is objection. So we'll have a voice vote. Question is, shall House Bill 528 go by for the day? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Chair is uncertain. We'll have a recorded vote. Question is, shall House Bill 528 go by for the day? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 24, noes 16.
Ayes 24, no 16. House Bill 528 will go by for the day.
House Bill 1257, a bill relating to drinking water, maximum contaminant levels, PFAS, compounds, other contaminants. Reported from the Committee on Education and Health with a substitute.
Senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. May that bill go by for the day.
Without objection, House Bill 1257 will go by for the day.
House Bill 1455, a bill relating to unpaid tolls mail. Reported from the Committee on Transportation.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've discussed this with the patron, and I have a question that I want to ask him and go over a few wording issues to make sure that I can reflect this bill accurately on the floor, so I'd ask that it go by for the day.
Without objection, House Bill 1455 will go by for the day.
House Bill 1501, a bill relating to modification of spousal support. Reported from the Committee on the Judiciary.
Senator from Roanoke City, Senator Edwards.
Mr. President, I move that the bill pass.
Senators, the floor.
And by explanation, Mr. President, there's some standard spousal support guidelines that have been put in this bill. It's not unlike the child support guidelines. And I move the bill pass.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, shall House Bill 1501 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 39, noes 0.
Ayes 39, no 0. House Bill 1501 passes.
House Bill 1530, a bill relating to no-fault divorces, corroboration requirement. Reported from the Committee on the Judiciary.
Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, I move that the bill pass.
Senators, the floor.
This bill eliminates the corroboration requirement for affidavits or depositions on no-fault divorces. That's simply what it does. I reiterate my motion that it pass.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, shall House Bill 1530 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 18, noes 22.
Ayes 18, noes 22. House Bill 1530 fails.
House Bill 1537, a bill relating to war memorials for veterans, reported from the Committee on Local Government with a substitute.
Senator from Accomack, Senator Lewis.
Mr. President, I move adoption of the committee substitute.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the committee substitute be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee substitute is adopted. Senator from Accomack, Senator Lewis.
Mr. President, I move the bill pass. And speaking to that motion,
Senators, the floor.
Mr. President, members of the body, House Bill 1537 is the war memorials bill that deals with the removal of war memorials. This is now, we have, in local government, we conformed it with this substitute to the form that Senator Locke's bill left this body. I will tell the body that this bill is destined for conference. I believe the House is already, we have already rejected what the House did to Senator Locke's bill, and I'm certain that they will do the same, return the favor for us on HB 1537. And so, but with that, I move that now that it's in the identical form with plenty of notice provisions and guardrails for the process of local control over these monuments, that we pass the bill.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose does the junior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator Kiggins, rise?
Mr. President, I rise to speak to the bill.
Senators, the floor.
This is, I guess I feel like this is just my last chance to speak to this bill before it gets on its final passage out of the General Assembly. There's few issues that I've, as a first-time senator, have lost sleep over this session, but this is one of them. As a little girl, I remember visiting the Vietnam Memorial with my father, who had many friends whose names were on the wall. Although Vietnam was not a popular war and was outwardly opposed by many, the wall exists today as a place of reflection and connection with those who have never returned home. I also know how I currently feel when I visit a monument that memorializes military friends who have died for our country through recent conflict or accident. Visiting evokes a connection and peace, and sometimes an anger and frustration, but allows a space for freedom of emotion and reflection. I feel sad to know that American war monuments, for some, evoke feelings of outrage and hatred. I believe all history should be studied, so it is learned from and its hard-taught lessons are not repeated. War memorials remind us of the terrible cost of war, the dreadful suffering and loss of sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, and siblings affected by war. They help educate future generations about past conflicts. They preserve a space for solemn reflection in congested areas and inspire others to create artistic treasures. Furthermore, most of our war monuments were erected not by government organizations to express official postures, but by private citizens as expressions of remembrance, pain, and patriotism. This is especially true for memorials that arose from America's deadliest war, the Civil War. Recognizing that our American history is not perfect, we should continue to give them the protection, respect, and remembrance that they and their families deserve and have so unassumingly earned. In most cases, these Civil War memorials are dedicated to deceased veterans who fought for their homeland and died or were wounded alongside their hometown friends. In summary, let us not divide the good people of Virginia any further than we already have by vilifying things associated with our precious American history. I worry this bill has the opposite effect we are trying to achieve and is divisive, not healing, and sends the wrong message to our veterans and veterans' families. I respectfully ask you to oppose House Bill 1537.
For what purpose, Senator from Hampton, Senator Locke, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. What was divisive and not healing was the erection of monuments that were not necessarily erected immediately following the Civil War, but were erected in direct defiance of individuals who were enslaved. They were erected as symbols of hatred. They were erected as symbols of Jim Crow. They were erected as symbols of defiance. They were erected at a time when, in the 1950s, I can't do this.
What purpose does the senior senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think you all are witnessing the pain that some of these monuments inflicted on Virginia's black community when they were put up. Many of them were put up right after Reconstruction as part of a lost cause narrative and a backlash to the social, economic, and political rise of the black community. Others were put up in response to the Brown versus Board as part of the massive resistance movement. If you haven't, and I tried to pull it up and couldn't do it fast enough, I invite you to read the editorial written by John Mitchell in the Richmond Afro-American when the Robert E. Lee statue on Monument Avenue was put up. It was very clear to the Richmond African American community that that was more than just honoring a soldier and a veteran and those who died during the war. It was the beginning of a narrative that was used by some to put blacks back in their place. And many of these monuments continue to cause that pain. And the decision about what to do with those monuments, whether to put them in context, whether to move them, whether to take them down, should be in the communities where those monuments are. Not here, just in Richmond. Part of what happened when this law was first amended to prohibit any monument, regardless of when it was built, from being moved, modified, or basically touched in any way. And that bill was vetoed. There was a work group that was put together. The only thing everyone as a part of that work group could agree on was that this is a very difficult but necessary conversation. If Virginia is ever going to heal from the trauma that occurred beginning 400 years ago, if we're ever going to heal like any family, we have to talk about that trauma, how it affected everyone, how it continues to affect everyone, how it continues to fester until it blows up in Charlottesville. Because when you don't talk about trauma, it doesn't go away. It simmers until it can't be held back anymore. And what that working group said was these need to be conversations in the community where people can have an honest conversation about perspectives that aren't theirs. If we don't do this now, when are we going to do it? When are we going to have that conversation, and when are we going to heal as a Commonwealth? Because I'm going to tell you what. My father, my mother, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, and I don't know who before them because when they were born, somebody didn't deem to put their name on a piece of paper. But everybody in my family, and Senator Sproul's family, and Senator Lucas's family, and Senator Locke's family has a story about the trauma inflicted on them solely because of the color of their skin. And these monuments, some of these monuments, trigger that trauma for every single one of us. We can't ignore that. We cannot ignore that. We need to begin the healing process, and ignoring this conversation or simply having it in the floor of the Senate or the floor of the House is not going to do it. I ask that you pass this bill.
What purpose does the senior senator from Chesterfield, Senator Chase, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak against this bill.
Senator, the floor.
Mr. President, while I have such respect for many of the different opinions in this room as they look at the symbols, as they look at the statues and the monuments, it invokes different emotions for different people, and I respect that. One of the things that I appreciate about those that serve in this body is that faith does bring many of us together, regardless of race. But what I will also tell you is that symbols are just that. They are symbols. And what may mean hurt and pain to one person can mean that is someone else's grandfather or grandmother or family member. And while there was a period of time in which I will say there was a great sin that occurred, that doesn't mean that that person is only known for that one sin of slavery. That person also had many accomplishments that were good. It was a culture and a period of time which was an accepted practice, which we no longer accept as right. It was evil. But it doesn't mean that we take all of these monuments down. We remember our past and we learn from it. We don't erase it. And while I understand the sentiments and my heart breaks over the slavery that occurred many, many years ago, and I would say that everyone in this room would call that an evil and never should have been perpetuated. But you also have to remember that these people weren't just bad people. They lived in a time in which slavery was an accepted practice. They did things that were also good and noble and of good character, and therefore we should preserve them. These are grandparents. These are family members. These are brothers. These are sisters in which these memorials were erected to. We shouldn't just tear them down just because there are some in this body that just the symbol of that person evokes negative emotions. This is about tolerance. This is about an understanding and appreciation that we all have difference of opinion on what that symbol represents. And I would just remind the body that as we deal with these delicate issues, those are people, they are representatives of family members and descendants and ancestors of some of those in this body and beyond, and we need to be sensitive to that as well. We need to learn from history, not erase it, and not repeat it. We need to have some type of context added or add more statutes to honor those and to remember the period in which these statues were elected. And with that, Mr. President, I would just remind the body that if we're going to be a tolerant society, we have to tolerate that this is not just an issue for your culture or your people, but for everyone. And we have to be tolerant of everyone. Thank you, Mr. President.
For what purpose does the junior senator from Chesterfield, Senator Hashmi, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I fully agree that we need to remember our history. I think we need to remember our past and the trauma of slavery and the Civil War in this country. But I don't think we need to commemorate those who led to that trauma. Commemoration and remembrance are two entirely different things. I actually teach the history of slavery and of the Civil War to college students. I teach it through the poetry of Walt Whitman, through the speeches of Abraham Lincoln, through the narratives of those who were enslaved. I teach it through the letters of those who fought in the war. Never once have I taught the history of slavery and the Confederacy through monuments that were erected during the Jim Crow era in an attempt to intimidate and to consolidate power. With that, I request that we vote in favor of this bill. Thank you.
For what purpose, the Senator from Hampton, Senator Locke, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I'm okay now.
Senator, the floor.
Okay. I think that it's okay to teach tolerance, but I don't think it's okay to teach revisionist history. And I think when I spoke about this bill in the local government committee, one of the things I talked about was my own dream of becoming the Archivist of the United States. That was my original goal, and I know some of you probably wish that I had become that instead of standing here. But for a short time prior to going into higher education, I did work as an archivist. I worked as an archivist in a state archives. And every day in that state archives, I had to walk by these monuments at the state archives. Every day, walking by these monuments. I celebrated Jefferson Davis's birthday as a state holiday. I celebrated Confederate History Month every year. I celebrated Confederate Day every month. I celebrated Robert E. Lee's birthday every year as a state holiday, being paid state wages, celebrating those days, to the point that my tolerance level evaporated and I quit the job. I quit the job and moved on to another job at an archives in Atlanta, where somehow in Atlanta history stopped for them in 1960. In Atlanta, Georgia, which was a bastion of the civil rights movement, where Martin Luther King was born, where they didn't even have anything in that institution about Martin Luther King, where they dedicated everything to Gone with the Wind, which was fictional. And you would have thought that Scarlett O'Hara was real in that institution. So I had had enough of revisionist history. So my dreams of wanting to become the Archivist of the United States died in Atlanta, Georgia, where they too wanted to relive the lost cause. So I decided to finish my doctorate and go into higher ed, where I could teach about the reality of what life is really like. Several years ago, I visited Ghana and went to Elmira Castle, which was not really a castle, it was a slaveholding pen, and stood in the door of no return, looking out on the Atlantic Ocean. And as I looked out, I thought to myself that there were ships coming through, going to and from that slaveholding pen, with many Africans down in that hold who traveled the Middle Passage, some to the Caribbean, some to the shores of what would become the United States of America. And I said to myself that maybe one or two ancestors of mine may have been on one of those ships. But I also said to myself, at the very least, that ancestor survived. Not only did that ancestor survive that Middle Passage, that ancestor survived the horrors of slavery That ancestor survived the horrors of Jim Crow. That ancestor survived the horrors of segregation. That ancestor allowed me to survive the horrors of walking by those stupid monuments that had been erected for a lost cause, so that I could stand here and say to you that those monuments and statues were not erected to talk about the reality of a history. They were erected to say to me, to Jennifer McClellan, to Lionel Spruill, and to Louise Lucas, to you, Mr. President, that your lives don't really matter to me. That you were the reason why we're erecting these, to remind you every single day that your life don't really matter to me. That you were the reason why we fought this war. And that you don't matter. But let me tell you the real reason for this bill is to give local governments an option of what they are to do about this. Not the state. That's the reason for the bill, is to give local governments the option, not us here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in favor of the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, one of the reasons I come to this body, and one of the reasons I'm proud to be a member, and it'll be an honor I'll take with me to my grave, is to learn from my colleagues and learn from their life experiences and to learn from the speeches I've heard, and to absorb that and make that part of my life experience that I'll pass along to my children. And I apologize for speaking autobiographically, because, you know, I always think, why did I do this? You know, I spent years of my life, I wanted to be here. I wanted to be in the legislature. And if you know my family, and I apologize for talking about my family, I'm not the first or the second person in my family to serve in this body. I'm actually the third. The original was a young man named Roswell Donahoe. He was from Loudoun County. He was the youngest of 5 brothers. And 4 of them served in the Army of Northern Virginia. 2 of them in the cavalry, 2 of them in the infantry. All 4 perished. He was raised as an orphan. He moved to the town of Fairfax. He married a local attorney's daughter, and he ended up somehow stumbling into the state senate, served for a couple terms. And he ended up having a granddaughter, Mary Walton Livingston, my grandmother, who became an ardent New Deal progressive, so to speak, and was someone who fought massive resistance and was awarded an award from the NAACP on her death. And I was there to accept it on behalf of my family. It was a great moment. And I say this because, not that I'm here to apologize. I have a Confederate past. I don't apologize for it. It's all part of a journey. And Roswell Donahoe grew up as an orphan. On the other side, my mother's great-grandfather was a 16-year-old enlisted in the Richmond Howitzers, was blown up at Gettysburg, somehow survived and lived to father a family. But it's part of a journey. And we're going through a journey. And, you know, I listened to what my colleagues saying. You know what? I was convinced when I came down here I was going to vote against this bill. I didn't care if it cost me my seat. I said, you know what? I would rather lose my seat than sacrifice my family. My family's more important than any legislative seat. But when I listen to my colleagues, it is a process, and it's going to have to play out. And a dialogue requires both sides. And as I said, I stand on the side of those folks that come from Virginia, come from little towns like Saluda, come from little towns like Tappahannock, town of Fairfax, which at one time was a little town, and we fought for the Army in Northern Virginia. And in some cases erected statutes. You know, you might remember the floor amendment I put on to take out the cemeteries. Well, there's a monument to the 17th Virginia Infantry in the town of Fairfax Cemetery, which was dedicated in 1908. President William Howard Taft actually came out to dedicate it and met many of the Confederate veterans, one of whom was my great-grandfather. And he's buried right next to that statue. And that was important to me, and that's why I put that amendment in. But I recognize what Senator Locke says, and She's a woman of integrity. I take that to the bank. I recognize what Senator McClellan says. She's a woman of integrity. I take that to the bank. You don't need to take what I say to the bank. I just say that this is a journey. Let all people talk. We all have stories. I'm so proud of my family. And somehow, maybe 100 years from now, my descendants, if they're still around, may be proud of this moment. And we're going to move this bill forward. And I do believe that there are guardrails on this bill, that there's a community discussion that's going to take place when we remove these, if we remove these monuments, that we're coming to grips with the history. And I have my own opinions on it. But the bottom line is this is part of a journey. And we're going to take a step on this journey. And we're going to hold hands on this journey as brothers and sisters. So I do hope we move this bill forward. Thank you.
Any other senators wish to be heard regarding House Bill 1537? Before we cast a vote on House Bill 1537, I may be called to vote on this measure myself. I want to associate myself with the comments, the eloquent comments of the senator from Hampton, Senator Locke, and I've listened to the discussion. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the discussion here today, but I want to note a couple of things. One, as you consider your vote on this bill, my family, too, has a story. And I carry the legacy of slavery in the Commonwealth of Virginia every single day when I write my last name. My great-great-great-grandfather was freed from slavery in the Commonwealth of Virginia on June the 5th, 1798. It's a fact that I learned right before I walked out of those doors of the Capitol on Inauguration Day, 20 minutes before I was sworn in as the 41st Lieutenant Governor, the second African-American ever elected in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia to statewide office. I carried a copy of that freedom document in my breast pocket. And so my family has lived with the trauma of slavery for generations, but has overcome it in so many ways with the help of so many people and with a gracious God. And so I hope that you understand that this is a situation that is so much deeper than a simple vote on simple war memorials. And I also hope that in this moment we will have courage, the courage of our convictions, that we will not repeat the mistakes of the past. It has been amazing and ironic and shocking, the fact that we will repeat the racist mistakes of the past with no irony and no self-awareness and no courage to speak up. And I'm hopeful that in this moment, after this vote, we will have that kind of courage. With that said, the question is, shall House Bill 1537 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 21, noes 17.
Ayes 21, noes 17. House Bill 1537 passes.
House Bill 1572, a bill relating to Industrial Development Authority's Town of Front Royal, reported for the Committee on Local Government.
The senator from Accomack, Senator Lewis.
Yes, Madam President. Sorry. Madam President, move the committee substitute. I'm sorry. Wrong bill. Madam President. Madam President, I move the bill pass, and speaking of that motion.
Senator has the floor.
Madam President, the bill simply allows the town of Front Royal to establish its own independent industrial development authority independently from the Industrial Development Authority for Warren County. Apparently, there's been a lot of controversy you may have seen with the Industrial Development Authority there. So the town of Front Royal seeks to have the authority to develop its own, and therefore I move the bill pass.
Seeing no one to speak, the question is, shall House Bill 1572 pass? All in favor of the motion? will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their votes? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 40, no 0.
Ayes 40, no 0. House Bill 1572 has passed. The senior senator from Fairfax County, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, Madam President, excuse me. Yes.
You're excused. It's been a tense day.
May I just read the title of this section? Hold on. Uncontested calendar, House bills on second reading.
Madam President, I move that all House bills on second reading on the uncontested and regular calendars, pages 61 through 81, that's House Bills 665 through 1663, that the rules be suspended and the, second constitutional reading of the titles be dispensed with.
The question is, shall the rules be suspended and the second reading of the titles of the House bills on uncontested and regular calendars, pages 61 through 81, House Bill 665 through House Bill 1663, be dispensed with? All in favor of the motion will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senator desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 40, no 0.
Ayes 40, no 0. Bills within the block are before us. The senior senator from Fairfax County, Senator Saslaw.
Madam President, I now move that all said bills, those House bills, go by for the day.
The question is, shall the House bills on the uncontested and regular calendars now on third reading be passed by for the day? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Bills will go by for the day.
Memorial resolutions.
The senior senator from Fairfax County, Senator Saslaw.
Madam President, I move that the memorial resolutions on pages 82 through 87, that's HJR 267 through Senate Resolution 57, be considered in a block in the usual manner, waiving the reading of the resolutions thereof, with the understanding that any senator desiring to remove resolution from the block will do so after the clerk has read the title of the resolution.
The question is, shall the memorial resolutions on pages 82 through 87, that is House Joint Resolution 267 through 57, be considered in the block in the usual manner, waiving the reading of the resolutions thereof, with the understanding that any senator desiring a resolution removed from the block will do so after the clerk has read the title of the resolution? All in favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolutions are before us in the block. The clerk will read the titles of the memorial resolutions.
House Joint Resolution 267, celebrating the life of Rosetta Cole Gilbert. House Joint Resolution 292, celebrating the life of Virginia Flynn Bell. House Joint Resolution 298, celebrating the life of Dr. James Henry Robinson, Jr. House Joint Resolution 299, celebrating the life of Vernon Lee Gordon, Sr. House Joint Resolution 300, celebrating the life of Ashton David Mitchell III. House Joint Resolution 310, celebrating the life of the Honorable Kevin G. Miller, Sr. House Joint Resolution 311.
Madam President.
The senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
We take the Kevin Miller resolution out of the block.
H.J. 310 is out of the block.
House Joint Resolution 311, celebrating the life of the Honorable Gerald L. Bliles.
The senator from Fairfax County, Senator Saslaw.
I would also request that that be taken out of the block.
Out of the block. 311 is out of the block.
House Joint Resolution 312, celebrating the life of James Michael Bevote. House Joint Resolution 313, celebrating the life of Barbara Wurtzel Rabin. House Joint Resolution 314, celebrating the life of Judith P. Carter. House Joint Resolution 315, celebrating the life of Henry Lee Carter. House Joint Resolution 316, celebrating the life of John C. Byer. House Joint Resolution 336, celebrating the life of William Robert Campbell, Jr. House Joint Resolution 338, celebrating the life of Maud Ferris Robinson. House Joint Resolution 339, celebrating the life of Judith Peters Beatty. House Joint Resolution 340, celebrating the life of Catherine Logan Tugendite. House Joint Resolution 341, celebrating the life of Jean Tsukimeni Mittori Revi. House Joint Resolution 355, celebrating the life of Calvin Frederick Larson. House Joint Resolution 356,